Welcome to All Grown Up Now, a tale of retail, relocation, revenge, reinvention, reckless behavior, really good clothes, indiscretion, infidelity, domestic violence, and one kidnapping. I'm Kenneth D. King, podcasting from my studio near Union Square in New York City. This podcast is another in a series of installments from a novel I wrote called All Grown Up Now, A Friendship in 3 Acts, available on Amazon.com. It's the story of a small-town boy who dreams of being a grown-up and his journey to get there. Each week, you'll hear another installment of this story. In our last episode, Ken met Darrel, the first decent man he had ever encountered in Oklahoma City. Episode 7, Call in when you miss work. Place, Oklahoma City. Time, early 1981. After a rocky start, Darrel and I started dating regularly. At one point, I realized he was getting serious. This made me very nervous. I was 23, young, with all the stupidity that comes with it, and I was fickle and buying cool clothes and having adventures and planning my escape from Oklahoma. Marrying him would just complicate things. I talked to Barry about this, and that's when he told me that the date had been a joke for his own personal entertainment. Darrel and I were supposed to hate each other. The city's sophisticate fashion queen would only be bored with the slow-talking country hick who would find the city sophisticate fashion queen tedious and shallow. Barry would revel in the comedic possibilities, like a sitcom, only live. He didn't think that Darrel and I would actually start dating regularly, let alone get to the point where one of us might get serious. It really annoyed him. But I knew I had to say something to Darrel about how I was feeling. At the same time, I didn't want to hurt him. In the interest of fair play, I wanted to be as honest as I could. He was a really sweet man, the nicest I'd come across at that point, and more than merited fair treatment. Since I was regarded as new meat in town, everyone wanted to have a ride, and I heard lots of, "I'll call you, you're special, grow old with me" bullshit. But when Darrel said it, there was a difference. It wasn't bullshit. When he looked at me, I could see steady adoration in his eyes. It confused and disoriented me. I hadn't encountered anything like him before. So, one evening we went out to dinner at a restaurant called Aunt Pitty Pat's, which was in an old house in the historic district such as it was. We were seated at a banquette where the tables were about 3 inches apart. I knew this was going to make conversation a challenge, as everyone was sitting practically in each other's laps. But I knew we had to talk. I waited until dessert, though, because I was hungry and he was treating. "Darrel, we have to talk," I began. "I feel like you're ready to pick out the china pattern, and I'm not there yet. I'm quite fond of you, but I can't say I'm in love with you." There was a crash at the next table. The couple there was so intent on eavesdropping that they knocked a big pitcher of beer over, which created a Niagara Falls of beer over the edge of their table that completely soaked the carpet and my new pair of Pierre Cardin shoes, the ones I had just paid a week's salary for. "Hon, that's all right," he said in his sweet oaky accent as I was drying off my shoes. "I realize that you don't feel as strong for me as I do for you. You don't have to. Just know that I love you." I apologized to Darrel for the way I'm writing his dialogue, as in print it looks like the dialogue from an extra in the film Deliverance. Darrel wasn't a rube, an idiot, or a product of incest. He was a good, sweet guy. Later, we ended up back at his place, taking a bubble bath and making love in his very, very deep, antique, claw-footed bathtub, candles burning all around the room. With Darrel, I learned the difference between having sex and making love. This particular evening ranks up there as one of the most romantic evenings in my memory, even to this day. The next day, the florist arrived at my humble apartment with a bouquet of orchids. Barry started acting squirrely after my conversation about how serious Darrel was getting. Barry was frequenting the bars in the bathhouse. There being only one in OKC, what a surprise. I went there only once. It was built during the Woodrow Wilson administration and cleaned only sporadically since. Barry had the idea that he would find a husband there. I used to tell him that the type of man who hangs out in those places regularly probably wouldn't be husband material, but he just dismissed me as one truly inexperienced queen. Inexperienced, perhaps, but I did have common sense and a lot of field research to base this on. Guys looking for husbands generally hang out in different venues than guys looking just for some fun. Also, when we spoke of Darrel, there was an edge to Barry's voice, especially the time I told him about Darrel taking me to the Eagle's Nest. The Eagle's Nest was in the top of the Chartel Tower. Since the tower was cylindrical, the restaurant was designed so it rotated throughout the evening, one of the woo-woo restaurants in OKC, and very expensive. While telling Barry of this dinner, I of course left out the part about getting a serious case of food poisoning. I didn't tell Darrel about it either at first. He found out only by accident. He called me at work, and they told him I was homesick with it. Darrel was so upset and felt personally responsible, as if he himself had put the botulism there with his own hands. He rushed to my tiny apartment to nurse me himself and apologized profusely. I had to remind him that buying me dinner didn't automatically mean he had personally poisoned me. Well, he never took me there, Barry spat after hearing about my romantic evening, minus the food poisoning. Why would he take you there? Perhaps it might be because I'm nice to him, bitch. One day in the early spring, after Mark moved away, Barry didn't show up at work. Since he didn't call in sick, everyone at work asked me where he was. Straight people think all of us gay boys know each other and keep each other apprised of our social calendars and whereabouts, sort of like air traffic control for ferries. I phoned Barry's apartment a couple of times with no answer, so I went by his place after work. Repeated knocking on the door got me no answer, even though his car was there, so I thought I'd go home and stay put. Perhaps I might hear something. A couple of hours later, Brad the doll called me from work. Get over to Barry's house, he said. He's taking pills. How do you know? Well, I just talked to him on the phone. Get over there. I'll meet you. Well, off in the car I zoomed, beating the odds on getting all green lights. I broke into Barry's apartment and pulled him out of bed. He was indeed a mess. Trying not to panic, I thought to myself, okay, what do they do in the movies? It's a question I still ask myself, part of the genetic hardwiring for being gay, I guess. That, or perhaps at a young age, movies were how I gathered information about life when reality proved inscrutable. I remembered that in the movies, if someone tried to commit suicide by taking pills, they got the person on his feet, walked him around, and made coffee. So I put on some coffee, a challenge since I don't cook, and hauled Barry's ass out of bed and started walking him around. I'm sure this was a sight, as he was easily a head and a half taller than me. Barry wanted me to put on some music. Music? Yeah, Donna Summer, he slurred. So I slung him across my back and tried to get his cheap-ass stereo working. He got exasperated at me and said, "You're so stupid you never were worth much." I was sorely tempted to drop him right there and leave, locking the door behind me. Instead, I called Don, my brother-in-law, at the hospital. He had a cool head and worked in the lab at Baptist Hospital. Quickly, I outlined the situation and read the information on the empty bottle beside the bed. "You need to get him in and get his stomach pumped in soon," Don said. "That's not one to mess around with. It's not like in the movies where you can walk him around and pour coffee down his throat." Okay, what do I do then?" "Well, I'll call ahead and tell them you're coming, but get there now." Just about this time, Brad the doll arrived, and we poured Barry into my car. Brad the doll followed me over to the hospital in his beat-up yellow Pinto. The two of us dragged Barry into the emergency room, where the doctor and a couple of nurses were already waiting. Later, when they had done their work, I was sitting in the room with Barry, waiting for them to admit him overnight. And then in walked the policeman. He didn't look like a friendly one either. I could see in his eyes that he hated fags and was disappointed that a fag hadn't died that evening. I felt my chest tighten and the hair on the back of my neck go on end. Since Brad the dog was nowhere to be seen, I'd have to deal with this one alone. Not something I wanted to do at all, but I was blindsided, so I had to. He fixed me with a steely gaze and spat. "So, you're his friend?" "I'm his friend with a small f, if that's what you mean." "So, he tried to off himself?" "No, I'm sure it was a mistake, officer. He wouldn't do that." "Because if he did, you know he could go to jail." "Well, he didn't try. This was all a big mistake." At that moment, Barry came to, sort of, and wasn't aware of the policeman. In a fuzzy voice, he said, "I think it would be grand to commit suicide by jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge." I elbowed him in the ribs. "So, the fag thinks it would be grand to jump off the Golden Gate Bridge, huh?" "Oh, I didn't hear anything like that, officer. You have quite an imagination." I rang for the nurse and asked her to show the policeman out. He gave one last snort of derision before he left. "Barry, you son of a bitch," I whispered. "What the fuck were you thinking? Trying to get yourself thrown in jail?" I was trying to breathe deeply and get the adrenaline back under control when I looked up, and it was Darrel. Boy, he was a welcome sight. The next day, I visited Barry in the hospital after telling everyone at work that he had had a bout of food poisoning. Barry was in high dudgeon. "I've had it with this town. I can't even commit suicide successfully here," he shouted. "You stupid bastard, thanks so much for piping up about jumping off the bridge right in front of the policeman. Just what were you trying to prove, anyway? Did you want to go to jail and be some felon's butt boy?" "Oh, go fuck yourself, Ken. I'm moving to Austin to be with Mark and Vic. I'll be happy there." "Well, fuck you. I should have left you there to choke in your own vomit," I said. I can't believe I said that, but I was really pissed off. I could have spent a nice evening at Christopher's, but no. I was hauling a 6'2", drugged-up beanful who smelled of vomit around his apartment. In the hallway of the hospital, I met up with Darrel. He, too, had gotten a dressing down from Her Imperial Highness. "Well, you gotta just let him be," he drawled. "Barry's one selfish boy. That's why it didn't work out between us. When things didn't go his way, he'd have a tantrum. I got tired of that. This is his pattern. He gets to a certain point, then does something stupid, then moves to another place. It'll happen again, I'm telling you." So off Barry moved to Austin, Texas, to be with Mark and Vic. We kept in touch with the occasional letter and phone call. In the beginning, I kept in touch with Mark as well. He would regale me with how wonderful his new place in Austin was, and how Vic was doing so well at work, and how it was a really good move. He had taken a job as a display person at the local military base's PX. A strange move, I thought, but perhaps there wasn't a Dillard's. After the initial flurry of contact, there was silence. One day, a couple of months later, after not hearing from Mark, Barry called with the news. Mark and Vic had moved to where he did not know. It seems that Barry had worn out his welcome. Well, gotten thrown out, Mark told me later, probably for boinking Victor one time too many, gack, and had to find his own apartment. Barry hadn't heard from Mark and Vic in the last month, so one day he tried to call, but the phone was disconnected. He then drove over to their place, only to find it empty. They had gone, telling no one of their destination. I must confess, I felt betrayed and a little lost. This couple was my role model of a stable gay couple. Yes, there were things I didn't understand, but I had thought that they were good people who gave the lie to the notion that all gay people were flaky, transient, and generally irresponsible. This was hard information to digest. These issues were my only real troubling concern in the spring of 1981. Since it was generally a time when things were going smoothly for me, work was doing well, Darrel and I were settling into a groove, my social life was hopping, I didn't let it cloud up too much of my life. but it did nag at me from time to time. A few weeks later that spring, Darrel had to move. As I said earlier, he was the office manager of the mortuary and, as part of his salary, had an apartment in the back of the property. Part of the reason for this was that sometimes he would have to arrange for a body to be brought to the mortuary after hours, so the owners felt it easier to have someone on premises. Also, the neighborhood had steadily declined, so having someone on the property at night would offer more protection. The mortuary was closing, partly due to the increasingly bad location, so Darrel had to move. He was in a state about this. Losing a job as well as a living situation was quite a lot to take. Happily, though, my next-door neighbor Brad the doll was moving out to be with a boyfriend, so I prevailed upon Mrs. Freeman to ignore the waiting list, much to cue the manager's chagrin, and rented a Darrel. My argument for this was that he was a really nice guy, and it would be such a comfort knowing my neighbor, as we lived so close to each other. Mrs. Freeman made the call over to the office with her usual dispatch, and the deal was done. I helped Darrel move out of the little apartment and to clear out his desk in the office at the mortuary. As he was finishing up, I was snooping in the office closet and found these really pretty bronze canisters. These would really make nice canisters for my kitchen. Would anyone miss a couple of these? I had forgotten for a moment where I was. No, darling, you can have as many as you want, but they're sort of occupied right now, Darrel drawled, a twinkle in his eyes. You have to evict the tenants. That's called the unclaimed relatives closet. By moving in next door, Darrel was close enough that we could see each other easily, but I could go home and close the door if I wasn't receiving. This was the ideal situation. After he moved in, I helped him fix the place up by making draperies and slipcovers. His family brought up new carpet to install, and I got to know them much better while helping move all the furniture. They seemed to approve of me and like me as well. This said, I was ambivalent about Darrel and me. Now remember, I was 23 and fickle and a bit of a slut and wary about tying myself down. I had gotten burned by Brock, my one first steady boyfriend, and I intended to get out of OKC at the first opportunity. Darrel was the model of understanding and patience. Looking back, I wish I had appreciated him more. Little did I know that men who worship the ground one walks on are few and very far between. Silly me, I thought they came along as regularly as subway trains. Spring was charming at my little apartment because Mrs. Freeman started early to plant her garden. She was at it every day, and her work seemed to bear fruit quicker than the neighbors did. Since her backyard was my front yard, I benefited by having a beautiful garden to look at without all of the tiresome effort. There were 2 wrought iron lawn chairs and a little table in the yard in front of my place. I could sit out there in the mornings, but never did, as I usually woke up with just enough time to get ready and go, or in the evenings. It was soothing to sit out there, watching the sunset and dodging the golf balls that flew over the fence from the golf course next door. I would usually sit there with some iced tea or Perrier and Godiva chocolates and read my mail before deciding what to do or where to go for the evening and what I would wear. During one of these evenings, I mused about Harry, who was Mom's lawyer. When I was a teenager, and Mom was going through her misadventures with her second husband and the boyfriend that came after, Harry was the voice of reason. He was the one who gave me hope that life could be more than the chaos it was when I was a teenager. Let me introduce you to Harry. We all met Harry when Mom divorced Don, her second husband. Mom went through the window of a fancy restaurant during their first anniversary celebration. They had gone to dinner at one of the fancy hotels in town, and lots of Chivas Regal had been consumed by Don before they left the house. He was already talking really loudly, which was always the first sign of trouble, before they left. The story of how Mom actually went through the window was different depending on who told it. Mom said she couldn't remember. Don said that Mom fell, but onlookers and the police report said that Don had pushed her through. If it hadn't been for the drapes, one of the big shards of glass — the building was built before safety glass — would have sliced Mom in half lengthwise, somewhat like a guillotine. As it was, the impact left bruises right along a line, starting at the jugular on her left side and continuing down diagonally to the right. This is where the slicing would have occurred had the drapes been open. I think it got her attention. Going through the window did indeed scare Mom, and she realized that the wedding vows of "until death do us part" were becoming perilously close to fulfilling themselves. That's when she made her first visit to Harry. I remember the photos of the bruises, not taken because she was having Don's ass hauled in for wife abuse, but because Don was suing the hotel for A, defamation of character for accusing him of throwing her through the window, B, false arrest, and C, having unsafe glass in their windows. Don had studied to be a lawyer late in life. He was studying for the bar exam when he and Mom were courting and passed the bar exam soon after they married. This was one of her excuses for his behavior. Such stress studying to pass this test. Everything would be rosy when it was over. Everything will be better. Then you'll see. We had to tiptoe around while he was studying. Such an attractive sight he was, sitting around in his cheap, thin, white cotton boxer shorts and droopy black socks, wiping boogers on his law books. Don's comment when finding out he had passed the bar was, "Now I have a license to steal." Such were the standards of the Oklahoma bar in the early 70s. This lawsuit was to be his first real case. Oh boy. If Mom had indeed fallen, Don was showing no real concern that she seek medical treatment or interest in her well-being. This was his chance to make his mark in the legal arena and clear his name, as he put it. It seems the manager of the hotel had called the police and filed a complaint about the assault. Notice it wasn't Mom who did. And the insurance company for the hotel was pressuring Don to actually pay for the damages he caused. And it was such a big window, too. And then there were all of those witnesses. I never heard how that came out. But the end result of Mom going through the window on her first wedding anniversary was the end of that marriage, and that's how we met Harry. Harry looked like George Burns in the movie Oh, God. Whenever I think of him, I imagine him with the cigar, but that was George Burns. He did have the gold-rimmed glasses, the same voice, the perfect delivery, and the attitude, though. Harry was recommended to Mom as an excellent lawyer. I liked him because he and I were the same height, and he had a truly cool car, a Datsun Coupe that was electric blue with a white vinyl top, mag wheels, luggage rack on the back, and white racing stripes. Harry also had a girlfriend, Donna, who looked and talked like Suzanne Plachette. She liked nude sunbathing. Harry lived with her, but never married her. For a straight man who chose his own clothes, he dressed way better than Mom's soon-to-be ex-husband, Don, wearing not a hint of artificial fibers, aberrant-looking sideburns, nor brown reptile shoes with black suits. And Harry had a sense of humor. As an aside, I really appreciated this sense of humor several years later, after I unknowingly had boinked his new law partner, Spad. Spad was a big, strapping man who had an enormous dick, I might add, the biggest I had seen up to that point during a bout of anonymous promiscuity. One afternoon after college, I was driving by Harry's office and saw his car, so I thought I'd stop and say hello. He was there, and we were having a nice chat in his reception area when I heard a door opening. "Oh, hey, Ken, you'll get to meet my new law partner," Harry said. He called out, and a man entered the room. He looked at me, and I looked at him. It was Spad. Now, Harry was no dummy. With his arms folded across his chest, he looked slowly, first at me, then him, and again at me. He said in a deadpan voice, "No doubt you've come to appreciate Stad's distinguishing characteristic." I nodded. Spad joked back that it was all the same for Harry, just another warm, wet place to put it, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Harry needed a sense of humor with Mom. He didn't take her too seriously. At times, it could be said that he treated her dismissively, but knowing her, that's what the situation called for. One day during that time, Mom had to go to Harry's office for something or other, so I had to wait in the lobby with Ruby, Harry's secretary. Now, stylistically, Ruby was like Della on the TV show Perry Mason, efficient in a proper but been-around way, a real lady. Ruby's taste ran to expensive, beige tweed tailored suits a la Balenciaga. Her voice even sounded like beige tweed. She had the apricot-colored widow's peak hair, very Susie Parker, the Revlon cherries in the snow lipstick, and stenciled eyebrows over the pale powdered face. The only flaw was the scar on her upper lip. It looked like something from an automobile accident, and it had disfigured her face just there. On this particular day, I sat in the lobby of Harry's office, thinking Ruby was so cool and waiting for Mom. The door opened, Mom emerged, and Harry looked over to me. He motioned me to come over and said, "Come in. We need to talk." Oh, goddamn, what did I do now, I thought. Being the only son of a widow woman with 2 sisters, these talks were a regular part of my life. They were tiresome, but there was usually no way they could be avoided. Some older male, role model type, would feel it was his duty to talk to me and somehow make a man out of me. It never involved him actually talking with me or listening to what I had to say. This monologue usually involved some variation of, "Don't be such a sissy. Do you want to grow up to be a goddamn fag?" So original and such a help. "Oh, I never thought of that. I'll go throw away my Barbie doll and buy a football immediately." I'd usually respond with my earnest rendition of, "Oh, really? Thanks, that's such a help. You've been so kind. Thanks." That done, he would walk away, chest puffed out with pride, with the sense that he'd actually done something that had some value to me. It was absolutely no help at all to me, and I hated it. So I went into Harry's office prepared to make all the right responses in all the right places and act appreciative for the effort taken to educate me. It was the expected thing to do. If I didn't act appreciative enough, he might brand me incorrigible or a pansy, and then Mom would give me hell for not appreciating the time that nice man took to make sure I was going down the right path. It was just easier to act like I'd had an epiphany. Mom stood there at the door and seemed to want to come in, curious as to what Harry was up to. "Go away," he said to her. "Go talk to Ruby. Ken and I need to talk." Then he closed the door in her face. Harry told me to sit down, sat down himself, and put his feet up on his desk. Then he gave me a long look. "I've been watching you for a while, and I see a certain something in your eyes," he said. "It's something you could get in trouble with, or something you could have a lot of fun with, so that's why I want to talk with you." I was puzzled. It didn't sound like the usual spiel, and it didn't feel like it either. He leaned over. "Life sucks for you right now," he continued, the light glinting off his George Burns glasses. "I know that life sucks for you, but you have no choice right now. But it won't always be that way. This is not forever. Your job right now is to just last, because one day you can leave all this, but not right now. Keep your head down, make good grades, and one day you can walk away from all of this and create the life you want. Then you could choose." Nobody had spoken to me like that before. It felt like a lifeline had been tossed to me. There followed a conversation that lasted about 2 hours. At points along the way, I could imagine Mom cooling her heels outside, absolutely steaming with curiosity and grinding her teeth with impatience. I thought of her sitting there, chain-smoking, and trying to make polite conversation with Ruby. Mom always felt outclassed by Ruby, because Ruby had been to college, and all Mom had was that inferiority complex about not going. I learned a lot of useful things from Harry that day, like how people use the word selfish to manipulate someone into doing what someone else wants. Harry told me that the word selfish gets a lot of bad press, but like everything else, selfish behavior is a very healthy thing in moderation. Harry and I were to have other conversations in this vein over the course of my adolescence. Knowing that there was someone like Harry who was sane and keeping an eye on things gave me a little peace of mind when I was an adolescent. And knowing that the life like this was not forever, and one day I could leave, That was what I needed to hear. I remember life being more bearable and feeling less grim. Harry became my gyroscope, which has helped me to keep from getting off course to this day. I'm deeply grateful to him for being there. And that's partly what I was thinking about that particular evening in my little front yard in Oklahoma City in 1981. In our next episode, Ken gets a letter that changes the course of his life. Thanks for listening. You can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, Spotify, and Google Play. If you have questions, you can reach me through the website allgrownupnow.com. You can follow me on Instagram at Kenneth D. King, on Facebook at Kenneth D. King Design, or you can find me on my main website, which is kennethdking.com.